Hello everyone, and welcome to round 5, well, rather game 5 of the 1971 candidates match between Bobby Fischer and Mark Taimanov. Now, as in game 3, I already did a video on game number 4 some year ago, but I will not be doing a remake of that video, as that video is pretty much all about the endgame, and I really covered the endgame extensively in that video. So, if you haven't seen game number 4 already, I will put a link to it. It will be the first thing you will see in the description below. So feel free to pause the video now, watch game 4, come back, and then continue watching game number 5, so you would be, up to date with your vast knowledge. So for those of you who just did that, congratulations, you are an excellent subscriber, and for those of you who just want to enjoy the show, we are continuing with game 5. So, by now you know that Fischer is in the lead 4-0 in this tournament, and this is simply unacceptable for the Soviet Grandmaster and, of course, for all the Soviets. So something must be done. Again, Taimanov has the white pieces, and again, you will see in this game, he doesn't mind. Already 2 games have been played in the King's Indian defense. Bobby Fischer won both of them. In this game, Taimanov will yet again employ the King's Indian defense. Well, he will not mind if Fischer employs it, but Fischer will decide not to play it. But as you'll see all that, let's use this photo once again to get in the mood for this game. Now let's check it out. So, like we've said, Taimanov opens with d4. Knight to f6, c4, g6, knight to c3, and the d5 now. So here, Fischer doesn't go for bishop to g7, rather he goes for d5 and opts for the Grunfeld defense. We have bishop to g5, the Stockholm variation of the Grunfeld. Now comes knight e4, bishop to h4. Tal says that some newer tournaments that have been played have found some very nice continuations for black in regard to this bishop to h4 move, but Taimanov still says that this is better for white. So okay, we have knight captures on c3, b captures on c3, and then now d captures on c4. We now enter the same variation Bobby Fischer played with the black pieces against Enrique Mecking in the Buenos Aires tournament of 1970. We already discussed that. So Taimanov likes the idea. Mecking went for e3, bishop to e6. Bobby continues in the same fashion. We have rook to b1 and b6. And this is the exact same position Fischer had in 1970 against Enrique Mecking in the Buenos Aires tournament. And here Mecking went for knight to f3. And after knight to f3, bishop to g7, knight d2, Fischer went for castles, and black had a very nice position. Of course, you can always grab the extra pawn here. But here, after this b6 move, Taimanov went for bishop to e2. It seems like a really timid move, like nothing's going on here, but it's actually a really poisonous move. So by moving this bishop from f1 to e2, really gives black a lot of problems. For example, if Fischer continues in the same fashion that he went against Mecking, for example, bishop to g7, now you get bishop to f3, attacking the rook on a8. And after c6, you get knight to e2. This knight is now coming to f4, and from there we'll attack the bishop on e6. This will be very nice for white. Another thing, after this b6 move and bishop to e2, you cannot go c5, because now you get bishop to f3, and you have to give up the exchange. If you try to defend this position with bishop to d5, white immediately wins with queen to a4 check. Knight to c6, and now queen captures on c6, a temporary queen sacrifice. Bishop captures, the king has nowhere to go, you have to block with the queen, and now captures, and you see that white is up a whole piece. White has an extra knight. So it seems like a really, no big deal, knight f3, bishop to e2, but actually a very poisonous move. So Taimanov came prepared, as he didn't know about the Mecking versus Fischer game. So okay, Fischer finds bishop to h6. He doesn't mind this variation bishop to f3 that we just discussed, where the knight will come to e2, and then the bishop will be covering the f4 square. So for the moment, guarding the f4 square, but at some point Fischer will have to lose a tempo to bring it back to the g7 square. We have knight to f3, c6, and now comes knight to e5. And here Fischer goes for bishop to g7. You could also play something like b5 to try and keep an eye on all of the pawns, but then bishop to f3, again attacking here, queen b6, and now d5 could be very unpleasant for black. So if you're not prepared for this, surely Taimanov was, as he did come prepared. Fischer does not go for this. So after knight to e5, we have bishop to g7, Fischer brings it back, and now f4. And here, if you, this is a very powerful knight. If you ever capture it, then you simply give white too strong of a center. White can freely castle, bring a rook over to the semi-open f-file. It will be a very nice position to play for white. So after f4, we have bishop to d5. Fischer finds a nice way to keep everything on the board and guard all the pawns. We have castles, knight to d7, and now knight captures on c4. We have castles, and here a4, a very nice move. And now it's very interesting. If you play something like rook to c8, you face this knight to d2 move. This is the threat. White Taimanov played a4. You don't want this pawn on a2 to be a target for the bishop. And here after knight to d2, c4, e4 would be very, nice threats for white, as this bishop doesn't really have all that many squares to go to. Here you would have to make a square for it on f7, but then c4, bishop f7, knight f3. This knight is now coming to e5. Again, a very nice position for white. So after a4, not allowing it to stay a target, Fischer finds c5. We have knight to e5, and now Fischer has to capture with knight captures on e5. If he goes for something like knight to f6, then again c4 is coming. Bishop to b7 and d5. You don't want to allow white this beautiful central structure. So knight e5, we have knight captures, d captures on e5, and now, while you might want to play something like bishop to e4, offer a trade of queens, also this comes with an attack on the rook, Fischer doesn't go for this, as there's still this problem of this bishop attacking the e7 pawn. So instead, again, we have one of those situations where it is actually okay to play f6. Fischer plays f6, and here we have rook to b2, a beautiful move by Taimanov, not allowing bishop to e4 to come with tempo, but also preparing rook to d1. This would win a piece, because the bishop would be attacked twice. Your only way of defending it is e6, but then c4 simply attacks the pinned piece, and it's all over. Bobby goes back with the bishop, bishop to e6, and now rook d2, attacking the queen. Queen to c7, and this is, Tal says that this is the not critical moment of the game, but critical moment where white has to find a decent plan to continue playing this game. If Fischer can bring this rook over to d8 and exchange rooks on the d file, then black solved all of his problems. So here white has to do something to really prevent black, or at least make it harder for Fischer. So feel free to pause the video here and try to find a move that would make it really hard for Fischer to bring the rook over to d8. As I always say, one of my favorite trilogies, aside from the fantasy ones, is Strategy and Tactics by Georgy Mikhailovich Lisitsyn, and one of the books in the trilogy is about finding a game plan. So it's very interesting. Feel free to pause the video here and find the move Taimanov played to really make it hard for Fischer. For those of you who were able to do it, congratulations, you are an excellent finder of plans. And for those of you who just want to enjoy the show, bishop to g4. Bishop to g4, a very nice idea, because the bishop on e6 is undefended and also attacked. You cannot move the bishop. If you move the bishop, then rook to d7 is coming. If you capture the bishop and then queen captures, you might want to play rook a to d8 now, but it doesn't work, because simply queen to e6 check. King moves, rook to d1 again. Doubling rooks on the d file. After rook captures, and you bring another rook over here, it seems that black solved all of his plans, but black is completely lost here. E captures on f6, rook captures on d2, and now simply queen to f7. There are no defenses, good defenses against queen captures on g7 checkmate, and queen to e8, which would follow in checkmate. So here bishop captures with check, pawn captures, and now of course not capturing the queen, but rather queen to f8, and this will be checkmate. Another thing, after bishop captures and queen captures on g4, black could go f captures on e5. But again, queen e6 check, king moves, and now rook comes to d7, and it's all over. Queen b8, queen captures on e7, black is getting destroyed here. So a lot of good ideas here. After bishop to g4, you might also try a move like f5, simply blocking everything on the king side, and only then to bring the rook over to d8. But again, it doesn't work. Bishop to f3, attacking the rook goes to d8. Now comes bishop to d5, attacking the bishop on e6. Bishop captures, rook captures, and now again you haven't achieved anything. It's white who controls the d file. You cannot trade here because queen captures with check, king moves, and rook comes to d1. It's again white who controls the d file. It's probably a winning advantage for white. So very hard to find a good move here for Fischer. So here Fischer went into a think and he played queen to c8. Seems very reasonable. Now Fischer is the one actually threatening to capture on g4 as the bishop is now attacked twice. Capturing on e6 would only would only make it easy for black, because now while you could play rook to d7, it doesn't really help you in a way that you can ever increase the pressure on the d file. So Taimanov doesn't go for this. Instead, he goes bishop to f3 after this queen to c8 move. He moves the bishop back, and now Fischer plays rook to b8, getting the rook out of the way. Queen e2, and now rook to d8. So Fischer did manage to bring a rook over to the d file, but it will not be all that simple. Rook f to d1, doubling rooks. We have rook captures, and now queen captures, immediately grabbing hold of the d file. Tal mentions that perhaps rook captures would have been slightly better, because after queen to c7, e captures on f6, e captures on f6, queen to d1. He thinks that this battery is better than the rook-queen battery. But okay, Taimanov's idea also works. Rook to d2, queen captures on d2, immediately grabbing the d file, and now queen to e8. Before you manage to do something about these pawns and bring the bishop over here, there's really no taking control of anything for black. So e captures on f6, e captures on f6, and now queen to d6. Taimanov is now threatening queen to c7 and making the d file available for the rook. So rook to c8, Fischer doesn't allow queen to c6. We have a5, and now comes bishop to f8, attacking Taimanov's queen, queen back to d2, and now bishop to e7. Now rook to d8 is definitely a plan for Fischer, and here it seems the black solved all of his problems. Bishop to d5, another elegant attacking idea by Taimanov. Queen to f7, we have bishop captures on e6, queen captures on e6, and now queen to d7. Taimanov manages to infiltrate here. You don't have time to capture on e3. If you capture on e3, this does come with check, but bishop to f2 attacks the queen, and there's no way to defend the rook on c8. So after queen d7, king to f7. Here a very nice idea. Guarding everything, the queen is guarding the rook, so queen captures on a7. And here again, even though the queen is not attacking the rook, you don't have time for queen captures on e3, because bishop blocks, queen captures, and now a captures on b6 will create too powerful of a passed pawn. So after queen e7, queen a7, b captures on a5. Bobby eliminates the passed pawn. And here we have e4. Again, a beautiful attacking move by Taimanov. Really, all of the games that have been played, Taimanov is playing beautiful attacking chess, a really creative chess. Now capturing here would immediately lose to rook to e1. The queen has nowhere to go as queen captures on e7 is coming. And even this rook to a8 idea, with the idea of trading queens, loses to queen to c7. Now there's no way to continue attacking the white queen. This queen has to move, and then rook or queen captures on e7 will win you the game. So after e4, first Fischer goes queen to c6. We have rook to d7, now with a nice attack against Fischer's e7 bishop. And here we have queen captures on e4, grabbing a pawn and defending the bishop. h3, making room for the king. And here you have to see that, okay, rook to a8 seems like a nice idea, threatening the queen, but it doesn't work because simply rook captures. And then after queen captures, then the rook is unguarded. Another thing after h3, Tal mentions king to e8 also doesn't work because rook comes to d1. Now threatening queen d7 check, but also rook e1, as the bishop is guarding the e1 square. So after h3, we have a4. Fischer starts pushing his passed pawn. Bishop to f2, attacking the pawn on c5, as the bishop on e7 is pinned. And here we have king to f8. A very important move by Fischer. If Fischer continued with a3 pushing the pawn, then bishop captures on c5 would go in the white's favor. For example, rook captures, queen captures, and then now a2. We have queen to a7 guarding a1, but it doesn't matter. Queen e1 check. King moves to h2, now queen to a1. Rook captures on e7, queen has to capture, queen captures, and now queen captures on a1. Will bring you to a queen's endgame where Taimanov would be up a pawn. So after this bishop to f2 move, attacking c5, Fischer plays king to f8. He waits with pawn to a3. We have c4, and now comes pawn to a3. A very nice idea. Fischer says that you can capture my passed pawn, but I will then get a lot of activity. We have queen captures on a3 and now rook to a8. Now there is no double threat against the bishop on e7, so rook to a8 is now possible. We have queen to b2 and now king to e8, attacking the rook. Queen b5, threatening all sorts of discoveries. King back to f8, and now comes rook to d1. You don't want to allow the black rook to come to a1. Rook captures on e7, Tal mentions, doesn't really give black all that much trouble here. King captures, bishop captures on c5, king f7. You do have a passed pawn, and perhaps you could start escorting it with the bishop and the queen, but a rook and the queen is simply too much to handle. So after king to f8, rook to d1, not allowing rook a1 check, queen captures on f4, and now bishop captures on c5. Bishop captures, queen captures on c5 with check, king to g7, and now rook to f1. Attacking the queen, Fischer plays queen to e4. Also possible was queen here, but Taimanov does have a passed c-pawn, so perhaps not go into a rook's endgame immediately. Fischer opts for queen to e4. We have queen to c7 check. Fischer plays king to h6, and it seems that Fischer's f6 pawn is now undefended. But here probably queen to rook to f4, attacking Fischer's queen, and then you have to allow a couple of checks, or simply queen to d6, keeping everything on the board. Works pretty well. You start escorting the pawn here, and I mean, white will not be able to win this game, but pretty much it's only white that can win this game due to the free pass pawn. But here, after this king to h6 move, much like what happened to Caruana in his game against Dominguez yesterday in the St. Louis Rapid and Blitz event, here Taimanov thought that this was actually a free pawn. He played rook captures on f6, and unfortunately for Mark Taimanov and all of the Soviet Union, pause the video here and find the idea Taimanov missed here. It's not very complicated, and it's really unimaginable that Taimanov played a move like this. But yeah, pause the video here and win this game for Fischer, so he can have his 5-0 lead in this match. So for those of you who were able to do it, congratulations, you are an excellent player. And for those of you who just want to enjoy the show, here the idea is queen to d4. Seems pretty reasonable. The king is in check, the rook is also attacked, so if you move the king, you're going to lose the rook. If you block with the rook, which was played in the game, Fischer played rook to e1 check, and now there are no more moves. You have to play king to h2, and then after you play queen captures on f2, there are no checks for the white queen, so no tricks. Taimanov would simply be a rook down, so after this rook to a1 move check, Taimanov resigned the game. So unimaginable. I mean, it's such a weird match. First, okay, winning in game 1, Taimanov was better. He had the attack. Fischer won. Then comes game 2. Game 2 is adjourned, and game 3 is started. Fischer wins game 3. After that, beautiful defending sequence where Taimanov misses queen to h3, and then Taimanov has to continue playing game 2, which was a completely drawn endgame, but he loses it because he was either too tired or he didn't have time to analyze it because he was preparing for the game 3 that he lost after so many hours. Then came game 4. You've seen game 4, or if you haven't, there is a link to it in the description below, where Fischer played the absolute masterpiece of endgame technique, and now he plays game 5, where he plays this unimaginable rook captures on f6 move. I mean, Fischer is not one to blunder pawns. He's been known to blunder a piece, like perhaps in game 1 versus Pasky, but very rarely a pawn. But yeah, Taimanov played it. Queen d4 check, rook blocks, rook a1, and Fischer is now 5 points in the lead in this match. And as the 1971 candidates matches were, thought of, it will be a 10-game match. So as Fischer is already 5 points in the lead, now Taimanov, to break even, has to win 5 games in a row. So if Fischer gets even one draw, now it's basically just over. So although the match is pretty much over, Taimanov can still, it will be a matter of honor. The Soviet Union doesn't want to print out in the newspapers the other day that Taimanov lost, for example, 6-0. So whatever points Taimanov can muster up until the end of the match will definitely go in his and in Soviets' favor. So yeah, that's game number 5 of the 1971 candidates match between Mark Taimanov and Bobby Fischer. I do hope you enjoyed it and that you're enjoying the coverage of the candidates, of the Palma de Mallorca Interzonal, of the entire Bobby Fischer story. I would like to thank Stephen Green, Nuncio Briglia, and Dame Pletvaric for your contribution to my channel. Thank you a lot, I really appreciate it. As usual, you can check 2 of my previous videos here. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you soon. Perhaps with a couple of videos from St. Louis, but also continuing the Bobby Fischer series. And a quick announcement, I bought Yazarov a nice microphone for his birthday, the one I'm using, so he made a video, as a thank you video. He analyzed one of my bullet games, which is funny because, you know, you shouldn't analyze bullet games unless Carlsen played it, but, you know, still, if you want to check it out, I do invite you to check it out, as now the audio on his channel has improved immensely, so a link to that will also be in the description below. Thank you all, and I'll see you soon.